So we are on Kuf Aleph Amid Beis, 101b1, towards the bottom of the first column on the left, in Mitchila Naso. So if someone married a woman and it ended up when she was a katana and it ended up that she never reached physical maturity, so she's an islandess and she doesn't get her ksuva. So the Mishnah said she would get tosef if the husband gave her extra, she would get the tosefes, but not the 200 initial. But if he married her and said, even if she ends up being an islandess, I'm going to stay married to her, then she gets her ksuva. Amrav Huna, islandess isha ve'eno isha. An islandess is a woman. Sometimes she's considered the wife, and sometimes she's not a wife. Amana isha gemura, but a widow who's married to a kohen gadol is definitely a full wife because we were talking about that. Even though the kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, or a regular kohen can't marry a divorced woman, but if they did, they get to keep their ksuva. So islandess isha ve'no isha. An islandess is sometimes considered a wife and sometimes not. Hikirba yesh ksuva. If he knew that she was an islandess and he married her anyway, she gets a ksuva. Lo hikirba ein la ksuva. If he didn't know that she was an islandess and it ended up that she was an islandess, then she doesn't get her ksuva. Almana isha gmura, but a widow to a kohen gadol is a full wife. Bein hikirba, bein lo hikirba. Whether he knew that she was a widow or not, yesh la ksuva, she gets to keep a ksuva. Rav Yehuda Omer, but Rav Yehuda says achazu v'achazu isha ve'eno isha. This and this, meaning the islandess and the almana kohen gadol, sometimes is they're fully married and sometimes they're not. Hikirba, if he knew that she was an islandess, or the kohen gadol knew that she was a a widow and he married her anyway, yeshak ksuva, that she gets a ksuva. But lo hikirba, but if he didn't know, so the kohen gadol, he didn't know that he was marrying an almana. He thought that she was someone who was allowed to be married to her. Ein la ksuva. So then she doesn't have a ksuva. She doesn't, and so then he realized he's not. He wants to divorce her, so she doesn't. So he maybe wouldn't even need a. She probably needs a get, but there's an argument today that she wouldn't need a get either because like an islandess, if you didn't know that she was an islandess, so there's the element we mentioned last time of mekach taos. It was a faulty transaction. If you would have known the facts, you wouldn't have done the kinyan. So it's possible that to some opinions, or that to this opinion, she may not need a get. We just say the wedding is nullified. But normally we don't task in that way. Uh, when even though in this case it would seem to be a mistake according to Rabbi Yehuda, but normally once people were living in a husband and wife, there was a ksuva, there was it's very risky and dangerous to try to annul weddings. Mesave, they asked a question against its opinion. Knasa b'ches.
He gives a gift, then he needs to pay for
Right, but the thing is that he's marrying her, he's divorcing her because he realized if he would have known that he wasn't allowed to marry her, he wouldn't have married her in the first place. So that would make it. Oh, no, no, no. So here's the thing. So from in regard to their marriage, it might be that she wouldn't need a get because it was false pretenses. But if she would want to get married to someone else later, we would say, well, maybe it wasn't really a mekachto, so maybe she still is connected to him. So we would need to give a get to make sure with certainty that there's no ishus, there's no element of marriage between them anymore. But because of the false pretenses, he wouldn't have to pay the ksuva, according to Rav Yehuda. Rav Huna says that even in that case, she does get a ksuva payment. So we have a brisa. Knasa b'chaska shehi kain, v'nimtza shehi kain yesh ksuva. So a brisa says that if the kohen gadol married her, assuming she was the current status that she was, which was a widow, v'nimtza shehi kain, and she was in fact a widow, yesh ksuva. She gets a ksuva. So the implication of this brisa is hastama if there was no understanding with this chazaka that she was an almana, the implication is ein la ksuva. She wouldn't have a ksuva. She wouldn't have a ksuva payment. Meaning he's only marrying her. She only gets this brisa says she only keeps the ksuva if he married her with the chazaka that she was an almana and she was an almana. That makes it sound like if the chazaka was she wasn't an almana and it ended up that she was an almana, she wouldn't get a ksuva. So that would be against Rav Huna. So lo tema hastama in laksuva. So Rav Huna would say, don't make that diuk that if there was no special understanding of almana or not almana, there's no ksuva. Ala ema, but you should say kinsa b'cheska she'ena kain, v'nimtza shehi kain ein laksuva. His text of I don't know if it's that his text of the brisa or the way that he's saying pshat in the brisa is I don't think he's changing the gersa of the Mishnah. If he married her in the chazaka that she's not a widow, Rashi says that she misled him. She told him, I was never married before. V'nimtza shehi kain, and it found out that she was a widow, then ein laksuva. That's all the Mishnah, that's all the Bryce is saying. But if it was a case of stam, she didn't tell him one way or the other, then she would keep her ksuva, which is what Rav Huna holds. Because Rav Huna is a Amora, he can't argue with the Brisa. So the Gemara says, Aval stama mai, but what would the halacha be if they married her without discussing if she's an almana or not, and it ended up that she was an almana? Islay, does she have a ksuva? Adatani, if that's true, then the Brisa should have said, Becheska shehi kain v'nimtza shehi kain yesh ksuva. If they married her in the chazaka that she was this status, meaning that she was a widow, and the fact was that she was a widow, yesh ksuva, she has a ksuva. Lashmi'inan stama, that would tell us that in a general case, if they didn't talk about her being an alman or not, the chol shekain ha, and certainly in a case where she misled him, she would not have a ksuva. Because again, the text was that he got married in the chazaka that she was this way, and she was found that she was this way. She has a ksuva. So, according to the way that Rav Huna wants to explain it, it's only excluding the case of where she misled him. So the brisa, if that's the proper way to read the brisa, the text of the brisa should have been a slightly different. So so this brisa should have taught us the stam case, and certainly that in a general case she also gets a ksuva. So from that, then we could infer that if she misled him, then she doesn't have a ksuva. So we're saying that Rav Huna's explanation of the brisa is a little bit too strained to make sense with the plain text of the brisa. The Otani, but also there's a different brisa, kinsa biyadua v'nintzas biyadua. If he married her knowing that she's a widow and they investigated and they found she was in fact an almana, so they were not permitted to get married, but they did anyway. Yesh l'ksuva, ksuva, kinsa stam, and the brisa says if they got married stam with just general, they didn't discuss if she's a widow or not a widow. Ein l'ksuva, and it ended up that she is a widow. He doesn't have a ksuva. Tiyuf to Rav Huna. So this brisa would disprove Rav Huna's opinion. So Rav Huna masnisa ati. So the Mishnah says Rav Huna was misled by our Mishnah in our case, because our Mishnah talks about the islandess, and then then it says if he got married, saying even if she is an islandess, I'll stay married to her. From the fact that our Mishnah distinguishes between an islandess is that the islandess sometimes gets a ksuva and sometimes not. But because the Mishnah didn't distinguish in the case of almana marrying a kohen gadol, he felt that almana kohen gadol always gets a ksuva. Which implies that almana, even if they got married plain. So let me just explain, take half a step back. If you married a katana, stam, There's no medical test to know that she's an islandess. So you got married, and then a few years later, developing, she's not undergoing puberty, and a few years later. So it ends up that she's an islandess. So most people wouldn't have married her knowing that she's an islandess. But if, for whatever reason, maybe it was a hush of a family or whatever, so he wanted to be married into the family, even if they couldn't have kids, let's say, and it's before Chaim Rabbeinu Gershom, he could have married a second wife to have kids with. So he would be married to her, even if he's willing to be married to her, even if she were an islandess. So that's the case for islandess. For the case of Almana L'Kohen Gadol, um, so therefore, because it is possible for the girl to end up being an islandess, it's possible to make this um, condition at the beginning of saying, well, if she ends up being an islandess, I'm going to stay married to her anyway, and therefore the ksuva gets guaranteed. Now, to our ears, the fact about almana is very difficult to understand because any rabbi nowadays who's Masada Kedushin, but back then they didn't have necessarily have a rabbi be Masada Kedushin. Someone would bring some Adam and go and say Harayat Mekudeshasli to a woman. Uh, I think the Rashba talks about that nowadays. That even in his time already, 900 years ago, you have to do it you need a minion for it. But but Midiraisa, you don't need a minion.
They didn't do that?
Who? They didn't have a minion for Kedushin.
Oh,
For a chuppah. Actually, is the Rashba talking about chuppah? I think I have to look up that Rashba, but the chuppah was probably public. I mean, from Boaz, it seemed to be a public thing when he married Rus. Marriage, I mean, the chuppah part but the kedushin part. But we would say giving the ring that back then that was not necessarily a public thing. So, but nowadays we have we always say, were you married before? Were your parents were both your parent either of your parents married before they were married to the spouse that is your parent? We ask these questions beforehand, and it would be malpractice to not to. But for whatever reason here, there's cases where the Kohen Gadol was he said, "Oh, you're not mana, okay, I'll marry you anyway." It sounds a lot crazy, but that's what it is. But so Mechlal the Almana fil b'stami nami isla. So Rav Huna understood that the Mishnah is saying that the Almana always gets her ksuva, even if they didn't discuss were you married before or not. Velohi, but that's not the proper pshat in the Mishnah. Ki tani la Almana aplukta the island is koi. When the Mishnah talked the halacha about a widow marrying a kohen gadol, that she gets to keep her ksuva, aplukta the island is koi. That's to be in distinction uh, of an islandess. Excuse me, a plukta the island is koi. It's going back, not okay. So plukta means an argument. So it's not saying in distinction to islandess, but it's saying the same distinction we make for islandess in the first case of the Mishnah also applies in the last case of the Mishnah. So the Gemara here is pretty clearly saying that we pass on like Rabbi Yehuda that that sometimes if the Almana Kohen Gadol, just the same way we distinguish that that if he made a condition that if she's an islandess, I'll stay married to her, then they are married and she would get the ksuva. Same thing happens with Kohen Gadol. If he thought that she was uh not an almana and he's allowed to marry her and end up that she was, then it would be the same status of an islandess and the same halacha as the case of islandess, that we would say that she would not get her ksuva in that case. Hadrun lach almana nizunis. We will return to you, 11th chapter of Kesuvos. Okay, 12th chapter. Okay, so midrabanan, so midiraisa, if a woman was married previously and had a kid, and now she's married to someone else, that husband midiraisa um, doesn't have to uh, uh, be the parent for provide food and clothes for the kid. Um, midra in general, the basic laws of uh, of of what's it's with the C of which parent gets would in case of divorce, which parent would keep the kid. So in general, the halach would be that babies need to stay with the mother to get nursed and stuff, and a girl would always stay with the mother. She needs a female role model, and the boy, at least from the time he's about 5 or 6, would need to stay with the father because he needs a male role model. That's the general halach of custody. I mean, that's the very basic. I mean, there's a few distinctions, but that's in general. So so if she has a daughter, even though she would be the custodial parent and she gets remarried, the halacha doesn't require her new husband to feed and clothe uh her daughter or kid. That I guess that kid's father would have to pay I guess what we would call child support, I guess.
I'm curious. Um, uh, Gets go to Beit Din. Do does do people bring child custody issues to Beit Din? I mean, I've never heard of that.
So let me put it this way: in contemporary here in the United States, Rabbi Schwartz would never get involved with any of those decisions because he said, according to state law, the judge of the divorce case has the right to do it. So he's not going to mediate or arbitrate because the state doesn't recognize the basin as having sole jurisdiction. So he would have nothing to do with it. Rabbi Reese is the opposite. I don't know that the state law has changed. I think he mentioned something about a case in New Jersey allows that New Jersey recognizes it, but that's a state by state issue. But because New Jersey recognizes it, I guess everywhere. Uh, uh, so he is very much involved, and they also had hired another person to help deal with uh, child custody and I guess splitting up the property and all these other issues. So I mean, I'm absolutely sure that that's what Rabbi Schwartz did, and I'm absolutely sure that's what Rabbi Reese does. Did this case in New Jersey actually legal case happen, within the last 10 years? Maybe I don't remember when it happened, but I know someone asked, uh, or I asked Rabbi Abramson, as I'm now of the basin, will Rabbi Schwartz, yeah, arbitrate or mediate their divorce? He said no because the the judge has right on that, so the right to decide all that stuff. So he won't do it at all. And I know that Rabbi Reese now is involved and they even hired someone else to help with that stuff.
Yeah, but because of the precedent and because of the general climate in the United States, maybe people just aren't gonna bring their issues there.
They're based in.
Yeah,
I don't know. Some people would, and some people wouldn't. I mean, I think also though, maybe I'm wrong, but from things that I'm aware of, which is a small sliver of everything, I think normally they don't split up siblings. They try not to.
right.
And it seems in the majority of cases, usually a mother gets custody. I mean, obviously there are exceptions.
Well, there's a
Um,
lot of nowadays
and then mental
requires
health
a lot of
issues and
joint
this and
custody.
that. Yeah, there's joint, yeah.
I mean, that's what they try for. They
Right. Well, there's joint, but I mean, it might be, 75% with one, but yeah, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So Hanose Isha Upaska Imo Kadesha Yozun Esbita Chameshana. So if he married a wife and they made an agreement that he will feed her daughter for 5 years. Chayav lezuna chamesh shanim. He has to give her. She has to pay the sustenance for 5 years. So what does this? What would be something that he'd stay on the hook? Listen to the next line. Nises la'acher. So let's say they got divorced, and now she married to husband number three. Upaski imo kadesh yosem zbita chamesh shanim. That her new husband, husband number three or four or five, whatever, but it's clearly at least her third husband, will feed her daughter for 5 years. The first one still has to feed her for 5 years. Lo yomer harishon, the first meaning the second husband, but the first one to make the stipulation can't say if she's by me, I will feed her. But if she's not by me, I'm not going to feed her. Because he stipulated for 5 years, there was no end time and there was no escape clause. I don't mean literally escape, but it's for 5 years, whether they stay married or not. So even if she'd move out of town, husband number two would have to send food or send money for food to the place where they currently reside because he agreed to give food for 5 years. And the second and third husband can't come to an agreement between them and say, Hare anu zanin osoka echad, we'll feed her together as one unit. So one is going to actually have to provide the food, and one will have to provide the equivalent of the food in money because she doesn't need to eat twice. If one's giving her breakfast, lunch, and dinner, she doesn't need two breakfasts and two lunch and two dinners. But because they each had agreed to feed her for 5 years, and the second husband, there's still time running on his 5 years, and the other one also agreed to feed her for 5 years. So she's getting each husband or ex-husband, if the case may be, has to provide either the food or the value of the food for the full 5 years of their commitment or whatever other year, whatever other time limit that they sent, that the wife and the husband agreed to. Nises, what happens if the girl got married and there's still less, it's been less than 5 years? About nosin lamazonos, her husband has to feed her. V'hei nosin la demei mizonos. And the stepfather or two stepfathers they committed to feeding her, so they provide the monetary value of food until their 5 years are up. Mesu, what if one of these husbands or ex-husband died and there's still time on the clock that they are obligated to provide food for the girl. So their own daughters can only be fed from unencumbered properties. So we learned that we learned several prakim ago, that if someone died, his kids get fed from only unencumbered properties, but they can't sell or take money from encumbered properties to feed the kids. But this stepdaughter, or possibly former stepdaughter, Nizunas min chasim shabadim, she would get fed even from encumbered properties, mipnei shehi kavalas chov, because she's like a creditor. Because her mother had made a deal with this now deceased person, but while he was still alive, that he had to provide her. So they're a creditor against him for him or now his estate to pay for the food. So it ends up that she's in a better state than his own biological daughters in the regard to the halacha, that his own biological daughters would only get fed from his unencumbered property, but this stepdaughter or former stepdaughter would even get the estate would even have to pay using encumbered properties or mortgaged out properties to pay for her sustenance because of the credit, because they have this agreement in writing or against him. So that's collectible even from encumbered properties. So therefore, the people who are sharp wouldn't because of this halacha that we just said, you're on the hook for 5 years, whether she gets married or whether you divorce her mother. So the people who are sharp would write the following agreement in the Kesuva. Al menasha azunas bite chamushanim. I'm getting married to you on the condition that I'm going to give food for your daughter for 5 years. Kozman sha'at imi, as long as you are with me. And so sha'at imi would include, or that would say that if they get divorced, he doesn't have to pay anymore. Or even if, well, I think Rashi says you would, the Mishnah just says sha'at imi, but Rashi says, and not if I die, and not if Yuma die, and not if we get divorced. Now, according to this, though, I'm saying according to this last line of the Mishnah, if the girl would get married, it seems that he would still be on the hook. Unless you would also, but the Mishnah doesn't say that it doesn't also include if she would that it doesn't also have an escape clause if she would get married. So I don't know why they're clever because there still is another one. There is a case where if she gets married, apparently this husband would still be on the hook. Okay, Gemara. So we're going to talk about a very important topic, but it's slightly off topic, but it is somewhat related to the Mishnah. Itmar was taught in a Bryce or Tosefter. No, it was a Machlokas Amoraim because it's Machlokas Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Omer l'chavero chayav ani lachmana. So if Reuven says to Shimon, I owe you $100. Rabbi Yochanan or chayav. Rabbi Yochanan says Reuven is obligated to pay the $100. Reish Lakish Amar Pater, and Reish Lakish says he does not have to pay. Hey Chidami, what's the case? If Reuven said to Reuven, to Yosef and Binyamin, you are my witnesses, and now listen to what I'm going to say. Clearly, my time at Reish Lakish to Kapater. What's the reason of Reish Lakish that Reuven doesn't have to pay? He clearly had Adam because he's making an important admission and he wants it to have legal validity. So how could Reish Lakish possibly say that he wouldn't have to pay? And if he didn't, and if Reuven didn't tell Yosef and Binyamin, be my atameda, you're going to be my witnesses, my time Rabbi Yochanan kamachayev. What reason does Rabbi Yochanan obligate Reuven to pay the $100? So liolam delo kamerlahu. So we must be talking about a case where Reuven didn't tell two people, be my witnesses atameda. So how come, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you'd have to pay? And what's our case? The Amar lachayev ani lachamana b'shtar. He said, I owe you $100 that we have, what we had a written document, a loan document. But it didn't, it was a written loan document that was never signed with. Here's what Rashi says. Rashi says that he gave a star, and the star says, I owe you $100, and it was signed, it was in his own handwriting, but there was no signatures on it. And it goes back to something way back from the second paragraph. So Rabbi Yochanan Omer Chayev Alima Milsa Deshtar Command Amr Edi Dami. Rabbi Yochanan says you're Chayev because it's so strong that he's showing this star, which is written in his handwriting. It's as if he was telling the people that were around him, you're being my witnesses for this. Reish Lakish Amar Pater lo alima milsa deshtara. Reish Lakish says Reuven isn't chayav to pay because the star doesn't make his claim any stronger. Because the word alima has to do with strong. It's not. So in our Mishnah, we're going to learn from our Mishnah. We're going to try to prove like Rabbi Yochanan. If the husband and the wife had agreed that he was going to support her daughter for 5 years, he's obligated to feed her for 5 years. My love ki agavna. Why isn't the case? Why don't we explain that the Mishnah is talking about a case like this, where the husband, no one knew anything about it. The husband, in the presence of other people, said to the wife, I'm obligated to feed the girl for 5 years. And he had this unsigned star that he's showing the witnesses. So wouldn't that be a case where he's obligated to pay her because of this admission? So as we turn to Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, Lo, no, that's not what we're talking about. B'shtari Psiksa. It's it was already written in the Shtaros that the Chassan and it's what we would call Tanaim. Rashi uses that word. So the Tanaim is saying, how's a wedding going to work? Who's going to pay for this and that? So they also made Tanaim saying, in that our marriage, you're going to be high for this. I'm going to be high for that. And so in these, they made a prenuptial agreement about what each side, which is about what each side is obligated to, and the husband's side, and the husband in there it says that the husband is going to provide food for the wife's daughter for 5 years, and there's regular witnesses on it. So we're going to see. So if they already have a star on it, why do you need why does the mission need to tell us? Obviously, they have a star. You could write anything on the star, and you'd be obligated to it. So what is the mission telling us? Rav Gidel, and it goes with the opinion of Rav Gidel. Dam Rav Gidel and Rav, because Rav Gidel said the name of Rav. Kama atanosin levincha. How much are you paying for your son? Kach v'kach, such and such. Kama atanosin levincha, and how much are you paying for the daughter? Kach v'kach. He says, I'm going to give this much. Meaning, these are mechutanim talking. How much are you paying for the wedding? How much am I paying for the wedding? Amdu v'kidshu kanu. If they from this conversation, when they're talking about how much are you paying and how much are you paying, and then the kedushin happened, so whatever they had agreed to, that has legal effect. Hein hein hadvarim haniknin ba'mira. These are things that you get acquired just by saying it. So what Rav Gidel is teaching us is that normally, if you make a star about something happening, you need to make a kinyan, and the star is formalizing that which you made a kinyan. But in this case, these arrangements about the wedding, who's paying for this, or about their household, she has a daughter who's paying for her food. It's in the star, but they never actually made a kinyan about the star. So Rav Gidel says it doesn't matter. Things like this, when they're talking about the marriage and the wedding, I mean the wedding and the marriage of who's paying for what, and then they give kedushin. So so all these things that they agreed to have full effect. Now nowadays, we always, before we sign the ksuv at a wedding, we tell the husband, you're obligated to cover this and this. Do you agree? And he says yes, and he makes a kinyan on it. He picks up a handkerchief or a pen, whatever, and the witnesses watch him make the kinyan, and then they sign the star. So the star formalizes that with the kinyan. And so Rav Gidel is saying, for these things, these type of things, how much are you paying for the wedding? How much is a chassan's father paying? How much is a kala's father paying? Or things like this. Who's paying for the kollel for 5 years while they're in kollel? Who's paying the rent? Who's paying the car? These type of things. So no, I'm serious. But so these are things that even if they didn't make a kinyan, according to Rav Gidel, they are obligated. And that's why the mission is a chiddush, but that's why it's no proof to Rabbi Yochanan, because these things in regard to the marriage is a special halacha that you don't need a kinyan for it. And Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a general case of indebtedness. So we're saying that we can't bring a proof to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion from our Mishnah. Tashma. So now we're going to try a different proof for Rabbi Yochanan. Now that we said our Mishnah isn't a proof. So, like I said, this machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is a very important machlokas. It's not related to our Mishnah, but we tried to bring a proof from our Mishnah to Rabbi Yochanan, and we pushed it off. But since we started, the Gemara is going to continue trying to prove one of them or disprove one of them. Kashma. Let's try to learn from a Mishnah in Bechoros. So this is talking about Pidyon Aben. Kasav l'choin sheni chayav l'cha chamesh slime. So if someone wrote on a star to a Kohen, I owe you five slime. Chayav litino chamesh slime uvno eno padoi. So he has to pay him the 5 slime, and when he pays it, his son isn't redeemed because the star just seems to be about a different five shekel debt, and not about the and not about the pigeon abed. So it seemed like Rabbi Yochanan that this star would be an admission that he owes money and has nothing to do with the fact that he has a son who he needs to redeem. So the Gemara says, Shani Hasam, no, you can't. That case of Bechoros isn't approved to Rabbi Yochanan, to Meshuba Lemidi because um, there's a state of indebtedness already from Midi for 5 slime. So in this case, because the father is already obligated to pay it, in this case, Rabbi Yochanan, excuse me, Reish Lakish, even though Reish Lakish in general would say that Reish Lakish in general says even if you have a written document, it doesn't make it a valid admission. But because in this case there is a chiyuv midiraisa to pay the 5 slime, so that combined with the shtar makes this an admissible thing that I owed him money. But in general, Reish Lakish but that's a special din of Bechor. But in a general case, Reish Lakish would still say that, Reish Lakish obviously argues on Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says normally the fact that you would have to pay does not show that it's an admission of that this admission of owing money is not really an admission. Ihachi amai kasav. So if so, why did he have to write the shtar? He already is chayv midiraisa to pay 5 slime. So the Gemara says, "Kedei levar lo kohen," because he could give it to Mr. Cohen, he could give it to Mr. Cohen's uncle, he could give it to Mr. Katz, he could give it to Mr. Kaplan. Which Cohen is he going to give it to? So he only wrote the shtar to say, "I'm going to pay the pigeon aben to this particular Cohen." Reb Chaim said, I think the Brisker Rav brings it down in Parshas Korach, is it? That even though we're obligated to give truma or to give a bechor, but the owner has the right to choose what coin he wants to give it to. So you have a certain element of hana by the fact that you get to choose your coin. So if a different coin can't necessarily come and take it and say, I'm taking your truma. I know you need to take truma, so I'm here. I'm going to take the truma. It doesn't work that way. Anyway, that's what's it called. Back in school, they called it the lunch tax. The bully would come and take someone's on this. I'm collecting lunch tax right now, so that doesn't work for truma. The coins can't say, "Oh, I know you need to give truma. I'm taking truma." No, the owner gets to choose what coin he gets it to. Ihachi, but even if he gets to choose his own coin, benoa mayin opadoy. Why is the son not redeemed? If the chiyuv midiraisa to redeem his son and the shtar combine, so why does the Mishnah say that the son is not redeemed? So it must be like Rabbi Yochanan that this is an admission of a prior debt, and it's not something special for Pidyon Ben. So Kidula, because it goes with something that Ula said. Damar Ula, because Ula said the Torah Parei L'Chshiyitin. Midiraisa, the son is redeemed when the father gives the 5 slime to the coin. My timer Amma B'nai Parei, but why did Chazal say that the son is not redeemed? Gezerah Shemayom Repodim Bishtaros. It's a Gezerah Midrabanan because people might say you could redeem your son with a shtar, but you're not. You could only redeem it with silver. So because the shtar is involved, it makes it look like the shtar. People might think that the shtar is what's affecting the pigeon aban, and because and the Chazal were worried that people should make a mistake that you can affect pigeon aben with the shtar. We said when the shtar is around, it doesn't work midin pigeon aben, but it has nothing to do with. But it's a halacha midirabbanan specific to pigeon aben. We can't bring a proof from this in favor of Rav Yochanan or against Reish Lakish in the general case of someone saying, "I'm admitting to a debt," and as the Gemara explained, the machlokas Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is where you provide an unsigned shtar, and your admission and presenting the shtar, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is enough to affect your obligation to pay it back, and according to Reish Lakish, it's not enough. Rava Ketanai. Rava said the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is really machlokas Tanaim, because there's a mission about the end above Basra. Arev hayotze acher chitim shtaros. So there's one opinion that we don't paskin like. I think Kesuvos discusses it, but let's say you have 2 witnesses on a shtar, And the first witness said, uh, uh, Elazar ben Aaron a Cohen. And then the second witness, said Shmuel ben Beryl. So when Shmuel ben Beryl is signing, is he signing on the content of the star, or is he also signing on the fact that Elazar ben Aaron a Cohen is a Cohen? Because at the end of Kedushin, it's talking about certain people. Are they miyuchas uh, to be a Kohen? And if their names were found in a certain old repository of a Beis Din in Sipori, then they're Kohen. So that's where it comes up. Um, it's not really likely that the second aide is signing on the fact that the first aide is a Kohen, but it's on the content. But there's such a concept. But something else that comes, and that's what the reason I mentioned this Mishnah is talking about this. What if you write an addendum to a star after the witness is signed? So the Mishnah is going to say here it has no halachic significance because once the thing was signed, anyone read anything underneath and they didn't see it. If you would do something, they need to sign again. So, Arev Hayoter Achachitim Shtaros. So, someone who said, I'm going to guarantee this loan, and it was written on the star after the Adam already signed, wrote that Levi, we saw that Levi borrowed $100 from Yehuda, and signed Shmuel ben Beryl and Elazar ben Aaron, and then someone underneath says that Yisachar is going to be a guarantor in case Levi can't pay his debt, and that part wasn't signed. So Govim Menachasa b'nei Chorin. So the Tanakama says that in this case Yehuda, the person who loaned out the money, he's able to collect from unencumbered properties of the guarantor because the guarantor it's on the star, but because it wasn't written before the Adam signed, it's not a full-fledged debt, and he's not allowed to collect from even encumbered properties, which he would if he was a full creditor. Ma'aseh Rabbi Shimon. There's an incident like this in front of Rabbi Shimon that they had a document like this that it was there was the loan document, it was signed, and then underneath the signature, Yisachar wrote that he's a guarantor. Va'amar Rabbi Shmuel says Govim Nechasim Nechorin. He can collect from unencumbered properties. So that's the Tanakamas, and that seems to be like Rabbi Yochanan. That even though it was the so we're saying that the person who's saying, I admit that I will pay the loan, I'm the guarantor. If Levi can't pay it, I'm going to pay it. So even though it wasn't signed underneath, but because it's on this signed document, that would be like Rabbi Yochanan. Obviously, Rabbi Yochanan was a couple generations later, and he was an Amora, not a Tana, but that seems to be the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Amr Benana said to Rabbi Shmuel, Ein a gove. You can't collect even from unencumbered properties of this guarantor. Not from unencumbered properties and not from encumbered properties, because there's the fact that he's a guarantor wasn't signed at all. Amr lo, Rabbi Shmuel said, Lama, why can't? Amr lo, Benana said, Haresha yachonik is chaver b'shuk. If someone was strangling someone else in the market. So it's a little bit strange. I don't think it's I don't know if it's literal or not, but basically we're talking about the guy who's strangling the other guy is trying to collect his loan. So then a third guy said to the guy who's strangling him. And again, I don't know if this is literal. I have some a little bit of difficulty. Right. So he said, "Hanach lo b'niyati lecha." He said, let him go and I'll pay it off. Just let him be. Potter. This third guy is exempt from paying it off. Shalo ala manaso halvo. He didn't do it out of willingness to take over the of the loan. He was just it seems he was just trying to do it to get the guy from stopping this. Uh so it's even a little bit different than the case we just said, because the case we just said, the star itself had a guarantor, but it clearly wasn't the guarantor clearly didn't give his guarantee at the time the shtar was written, because if it would have, it would have been in the text of the shtar itself. Levi is borrowing $100 from Yehuda, and Yisachar is going to be a guarantor in case Levi doesn't pay off. Yisachar will pay off the loan to Yehuda. So when this thing was added to the shtar, it happened later. And when this guy is collecting from someone else in the shuk, and he said, let him be, I'll pay you off. It's not a formal issuance of being a guarantor. In both cases happened later, but uh, this seems to be so lame Rabbi Yochanan Damer Rabbi Shmuel. So let's say Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Shmuel, Reish Lakish Damer Ben Nanas, and Reish Lakish holds like Ben Nanas. That Ben Nanas said just because it's written on here, but it was not at the time of the loan, so it's some later thing, and there's no witnesses to it, and that cannot create a new indebtedness. So the Gemara says no. Ali, but the Ben Nanas Kol Yama Lo Pligi. According to Ben Nanas, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both agree that you're pater. When we turn to Kuf Beis on base, Ki Pliga Libre Rabbi Shmuel, but the Machlokas, but they're still willing. But Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish still have their argument within Rabbi Shmuel's shita, because Rabbi Yochanan holds completely Rabbi Shmuel. He says that he owes money, so we believe him. You owe the money. Reish Lakish Ad Kan Lo Kam Rabbi Shmuel Hasam Ad L'Shayach L'Shibuda D'Iraisa. Reish Lakish would say Rabbi Yishmael only said his din there because there's there's a biblical obligation to pay it back. And on a Torah level, you're able to create this level of indebtedness that way. Aval hacha, but in the case Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are arguing, lo shachshi b'du diraisa. It's not a case where it's a loan that would work on a diraisa level. It's less than that. So therefore, Reish Lakish would still argue within Rabbi Shmuel, saying in Rabbi Shmuel's case, I agree. I'm not arguing with Rabbi Shmuel, but in this slightly different case, I don't think Rabbi Shmuel would say it. Okay. Uh, let's leave it here. I think it's mincha time.